What's going on, y'all? Bud Elliott here, back again with another edition of the Nolecast. Wanted to hit you guys up, chat about a little Florida State football questions. A lot of these come from our Patreon, patreon.com/Nolecast. Appreciate all of our supporters there, of course. Also appreciate our sponsors. Off the jump, the legendary team. Chad does such an awesome job with your home loan. 844-FSU-LOAN. 844-FSU-LOAN is the number to call. Of course, Congruity, Matt Lewis absolutely crushes. CongruityHR.com/Knowles. CongruityHR.com/Knowles. Making some progress on some rotating co-hosts until Graham gets back. So excited about that. But this is going to be a little bit of a quicker episode today, mainly answering a couple of Patreon questions, some market-related questions, and just some projection-based stuff. But first, let's go ahead and discuss what we're going to talk about with coordinators. A lot of questions like who should FSU hire as an offensive coordinator? What are they looking for in an offensive coordinator? Bud, who would you hire as an offensive coordinator? Well, I'm certainly not perfect, in terms of choosing an offensive coordinator or head coach or anything like that. But I do follow a lot of these programs nationally, pretty good. So to start, I think that Joe Craddock from Tulane would probably be my choice. I saw him work with some really kind of misfit toys when he was at Troy. I know he coaches for John Summerall. Summerall brought him from Troy, where they won back-to-back Sun Belt championships, to Tulane. And now they are probably the best team in the American Conference this year at Tulane and are likely to win the American, but they've already clinched their spot in the American title game. They did lose to Oklahoma and to Kansas State. There's really no shame in that, I don't think, if you're to Tulane. And I think what's interesting with Craddock is that he has shown a real a want to evolve what he does offensively. At Troy, I didn't necessarily always love what they ran. But at Tulane, he's taken and just tricked this thing out like crazy. I mean, this is an absolute just like motion shifting Shanahan 49ers looking offense. And I think in terms of fitting with what Mike Norvell would want to run, because you're not going to, I think if you're Norvell, you're not going to go hire somebody with which you're totally uncomfortable with what they run. I think Craddock would be a good fit. I like guys who are able to scheme open some wide open stuff once a game, twice a game, maybe 3 times a game. Now, in fairness, he does have probably or maybe the best quarterback in the American Conference this year. There's actually some pretty good ones. Obviously, Memphis as a kid, the Navy kid is really good for that scheme. But freshman Darren Mensah is really nice. Again, I don't know if Craddock's reached out to FSU or even what that looks like. I'll have a little bit more on that in a second. But continuing here, I like what he does. I think Mike Norvell is a guy who is traditionally run first and wants to throw the football down the field. If you watch Tulane, that is pretty much what they do. They're going to want to pound the rock. They're going to want to try to create explosive runs with shifts, formations, things like that. Little eye candy for the defense while you keep it pretty simple up front, which again, you're going to need to keep it pretty simple up front, I think, regardless of who you hire to be your offensive coordinator, because of the offensive line situation that you have. I like what he runs. I do. I watched him a pretty good bit. I think he's evolved nicely. He's clearly shown a willingness to learn. Now, is he gettable? Is he even FSU's first choice? From what I've been told, Oklahoma is clearly in the market, right, for a coordinator, and that's just something we're going to have to watch. But does Oklahoma want to run that system? I'm not so sure that they do. Oklahoma right now runs a variation of the air raid offense, okay? There are a couple obvious candidates for that if you want to run that system. The first being Jake Spavital at Baylor. The second being Ben Arbuckle at Washington State. Both those guys are pretty true air raidy. And for Oklahoma, part of your issue this year is that you did a poor job with the transfer portal with the offensive line. Hey, welcome to the club, Sooners. And you also had some major injury issues at receiver. The offensive line may or may not get fixed. I think receiver almost certainly will get fixed, and in probably pretty short order, just as long as guys come back, decide not to transfer, and stay healthy. And this is not an Oklahoma podcast, but I think this is important to get into because obviously the market for coordinators is dependent on who else is in the market for them. The word on the street is that Spavital, and I think by connection, quarterback Sawyer Robertson, who is really damn good for Baylor this year. If you guys have watched Baylor, Robertson is a kick and play. I think Mississippi State probably regrets not retaining him because in that system, he is absolutely ripping the ball, making some high-level throws. Baylor has decided to retain head coach Dave Aranda, and he was on the hot seat. They decided to keep him. Now, stop me if you've heard this before, but if you decide to keep him as opposed to paying the buyout, you probably don't want to let the coordinator and quarterback go somewhere else when those two are largely responsible for the turnaround that Baylor has had this year. So it may be that Oklahoma can want Jake Spavital and want Sawyer Robertson until the cows come home. But if Baylor, which is a private school, if they got money, I mean, and they do, they could probably pay to keep those guys. And I don't think Dave Aranda's seat is truly any hotter than Brent Venables. But I do think if you're Oklahoma, it makes sense to keep running some version of the air raid system. And I spoke with someone who's pretty tight with OU. And he's like, look, I like what Craddock does quite a bit. However, we got real D linemen in this league. Y'all don't, meaning the ACC, which is not entirely true if you look at draft stuff. But in general, yeah, you're going to face a much higher quality of defensive linemen in the SEC than you are in the ACC. Oklahoma's finding that out this year, by the way, because the Big 12, their D linemen suck compared to the ACC, the SEC, or the Big 10. That's a position the Big 12 pretty rarely produces in terms of quality or especially quantity of quality coming out for the draft. Now that they're in the SEC, it's a different ballgame. So they're probably not going to be able to massively upgrade their offensive line in the portal this offseason. So continuing to run a system that kind of minimizes the need for winning at the line of scrimmage, which Craddock's is probably a little bit more reliant on that than Spavital or Arbuckle, that would kind of make some sense. It doesn't mean that Oklahoma can't go get Craddock. It doesn't mean he wouldn't succeed there. But just from the guy I talked to, and here's the thing. If Arbuckle's like, Venables probably gets fired, and Spavital's like, well, Baylor's going to pay up, might as well just stay here if the money's the same, then maybe they do turn to Craddock or someone else in the offensive coordinator market. But I'm not entirely sure that they do or that they have to. I think he's a good name. Is it a little bit concerning that his offenses really took off when he got a good quarterback? I guess kind of. I mean, nobody has great offenses without great quarterbacks, but he has won. I like some of the stuff he did at Troy in terms of doing enough with the pieces that he had. They didn't put up monster numbers. They had incredibly good defenses, and they played good, if you will, complementary football. They didn't turn the ball over a lot. They had a really good back in Kamani Vidal, who's now, I believe, in the NFL. Pretty good player, and maybe the best back in the Sun Belt over the last few years. Kind of like on that Montreal Johnson level, I think, if you want to make a comparison for Craddock there when he was back at Troy. But yeah, I do think that is something to monitor. That doesn't mean that Craddock's FSU's top choice either. If you're Mike Norvell, and here's where I want to split this. Who would I go get? Who would Mike Norvell go get? If you're Mike Norvell, you basically need to have a pretty quick turnaround here, I think, just using common sense, right? It doesn't necessarily mean you need to go win the ACC next year. But I think it's reasonable to say, if FSU does not return at least to a bowl next year and just get back on more solid footing and put a product out there that people can be proud of and celebrate the improvement of, the Norvell's in jeopardy if something happened to him, obviously. The whole athletic department is kind of tied to that. Alfred hitched his wagon to Norvell as well, and this is what it is. You kind of need somebody who can come in and run a system with what you have and what you're likely to be able to acquire in the transfer portal. What are you likely to be able to acquire in the transfer portal? To me, I think you can get some decent, proven offensive linemen. Not great, not NFL caliber players, nothing like that. Just some solid guys. We have seen that numerous times, right? Got a kid from Charlotte, got a kid from Notre Dame. Both worked out pretty well in recent years. Not guys that you liked in high school, took and missed out on, but now they're coming back for a second bite of the apple. I'm just talking about dudes who have proven at a lower level that they can probably play ACC ball, not SEC ball, but just ACC ball. If you're Norvell, you got to get that thing flipped. You probably need to take 2 or 3 offensive linemen in the portal this offseason, I think. I think that's one of the reasons why Alex Atkins is gone. You're in survival mode. Like, the most important year for Mike Norvell now is 2025. I don't know that you're really building for anything long-term as your primary goal. I think your primary goal is survive. And then if you're able to survive, then you start working through it. College ball is really changing as a world with the whole house settlement thing, salary cap type stuff coming. There's a lot of moving pieces here for sure. And he's done a good job overall. And then obviously this year has been an absolute disaster, but he's got to survive in 2025, which leads me to a candidate, which I think is very interesting. And that's Brennan Marion. He runs what he is termed, and I think the guy is a good coach and also a really good marketer of what he does. The go-go offense. Go-go is an offense that I think actually fits your personnel fairly decently. I know it didn't look this way this year, but I think you can be a better run blocking team than a pass blocking team with a bit of a scheme change next year. It's not an offense that wants to drop back 50 times a game. It is a run-focused offense. It's going to use a lot of 2-backs. It is going to use some motion, a lot of backfield fakes. There are some, quite a few actually, spread option elements to this offense. It's not really one that, if it gets behind the chains, is particularly all that great. But you know what? Neither was Urban Myers. There are a lot of guys who have a history of, kind of hitting explosives on early downs and trying to stay ahead of the chains as well there, which I think Marion tries to do. He's done a nice job at UNLV as the offensive coordinator. They had their quarterback quit this year, which was interesting. I think the word on the street was like he asked for either more money, or if you want to read the other way, like UNLV didn't pay him kind of what he thought he was going to get, and it wasn't in writing, which of course is kind of nuts to me. But then the backup, actually, we found out Hajj-Malik Williams is a much better player for UNLV, and went out and just destroyed Fresno State in that opening game. If you want to watch some UNLV stuff, I think the Fresno game is good. I think the Boise game is probably pretty good. The Syracuse game is also worth watching in a loss. I mean, they kind of got handled there pretty well. But it is an interesting offense. I would identify it as a bit of like a special prep offense, meaning, and I don't know that that's necessarily like always the best thing to run if you're at a kind of a Goliath as opposed to a David school. And despite the record, I think you still have to label FSU as kind of a Goliath program because everybody seems to get up to play them, even if they totally suck. The Gators game against FSU is a 7:30 night game against a team that is going to have 1 or 2 wins after this weekend against Charleston Southern. I think that tells you all you need to know about the brand value and the power of the logo and the kind of weight that it carries. But when I say special prep offense, I mean like something you run that is distinctly different from what other people run, to where if the opponent doesn't really take you seriously in practice, you can sneak up and bust them. Now, do you need to sneak up on people at FSU? Normally, no. Like I said, next year, it wouldn't hurt to be able to sneak up on some folks. It is a different offense than what you're going to see normally. There are some pro-style elements to it, but for the most part, it is rooted in kind of some spread option stuff. It's going to be run first, which I think Mike Norvell likes. Obviously, Norvell has some connections to Brennan Marion. Norvell is also a bit of like a Malzahn guy. You know, if you kind of follow like the progression of those careers. And I do think that whole Malzahn tree, you know, Malzahn, why am I blanking on the coach at SMU? They all have a pretty strong inkling to run the football, and they think running the football is really important. And I'm not saying it's not, right? Like passing is more efficient if you do it really well. It's a little bit less efficient if you're not quite so good at it. So just something to keep in mind there. I think that would be a good fit for what Mike Norvell wants to do for an immediate turnaround potentially, but also for the personnel that you're likely to have. You have some pretty nice backs on this team, some young backs who I think you can create some explosive plays and also maintain a high level of rushing efficiency with, you know, Cam Davis, Danzy, all those type of guys. I think it is incredibly unlikely that you're going to be able to massively improve the receiver position this year in the transfer portal. There are a lot of guys out there who are going to command top dollar. They're going to come play with a top quarterback. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be tough to get studs in here at receiver through the transfer portal. You're going to have to do a better job through high school, which you were doing over the summer. I mean, the 3 kids you had committed, I think, were excellent prospects, and things were going pretty well until FSU just completely crapped the bed, obviously, this season. And since those guys have since decommitted. So if you're thinking about it, hey, an offense that can use like play action and run fakes to get some receivers open, because those receivers probably aren't that great. An offense that can use multiple tight ends and multiple backs, I think that's a check. That's not saying I think it's like the best hire you could make, but I think it's one that is an interesting hire. Marion's also definitely a good recruiter. Like, the guy does have a reputation for being in the fight and also landing some top prospects. I think it's interesting that Barry Odom, who's a defensive-minded head coach, decided to bring him in and run a scheme that is truly unique. It reminds me a little bit of when Bob Stoops went to Oklahoma in 1999 or 2000. I'm trying to remember what year he got there. Might have been 99. And he decided to hire a young coach who used to give him fits, and it was a very interesting and special prep, named Mike Leach, who was running an offense which 25 years ago was quite revolutionary. It was called the air raid offense. So I don't know. I think Barry Odom's a damn good football coach. I thought he did a fine job at Arkansas. And Arkansas, they got to rotate guys every couple of years because they just can't reach the heights that their fan base thinks they can. And so you got to kind of restart the hype cycle to keep people donating and buying tickets, because if you tell them, hey, 6-6, 7-5 is the best we can do, they all quit. So I do think that's I think it'd be a fine hire. I think you could have some success with it, and like, there's no guarantees in it, but in terms of like the personnel you have, I think that could actually work. If you decide to pursue a transfer quarterback, by the way, I don't think you would take UNLV's kid at this point, but because this is a system that is going to put an emphasis on quarterback mobility, some quarterback run, et cetera, I think that is probably better than a system that is just pure drop back, doesn't really use quarterback leg at all, because I don't know how many guys out there who are attainable, affordable, et cetera, and who actually have any real interest in your program, who are great pure throwers. It doesn't mean you give up on Brock or Luke. I think FSU would like to keep both of those guys. But it does mean if you decide to bring in a guy to kind of bridge the gap or to come compete, that someone who has a lot of mobility would be a smart choice, in my opinion. And I think, obviously, if you look at Marion's track record, they're going to want to have a guy who can rush the football pretty well. Malik Williams does it for them as well, as Matthew Sluka did before he quit the team. So that's kind of my thoughts on the offensive coordinator situation. I would not expect a return to a top 25 offense next year. But I do think, because of how bad it is, that there is real potential and maybe even expectation for massive improvement, to be honest. I think that is something that is quite attainable because of how far down you are. If you could go from, one of the worst offenses in the country to something in the top half, that would be pretty solid. It would also be pretty solid if you could play good defense again. Next episode, I'll talk more about defensive coordinator candidates who I think could make sense. And part of that, though, is going to be how attractive you are. Something that's certainly really attractive. Madso, Township, Charlie Park Rooftop Restaurant. You can hit them in the show notes there for the link. Matt Thompson and the For the Table Restaurant Group do a tremendous job with all of their concepts. But Charlie Park's awesome, man. You want to get a drink. Beautiful weather outside right now. Obviously in Tallahassee, getting a little bit chilly, kind of boots weather, jacket weather. That is always exciting. If you want to have a special event there, maybe you have a son or daughter graduating from FSU in the winter. Go ahead and reserve a table now, so you can have a special little celebration for them. All right. Defensively, a lot of this is going to come down to, who does FSU seriously get to stay? At this point, I don't think they're going to keep guys like A.Z. Thomas, Daryl Jackson, Josh Farmer, etc. I think their bigger concern needs to probably be holding on to some of their younger guys in whom they still have a reasonable belief can hit. Not a guaranteed hit. You are going to need to hit the transfer portal to bring in some guys who resemble a little bit more of what you did in 22 and some in 23. And by 22, I mean maybe not guys who were guaranteed superstars, but guys who you had watched play a lot of college football snaps, not high school, college football snaps. And you had some reasonable certainty that they could play college football in the ACC at least a decent percent of the time. Are you going to hit 1,000? No. Do you need to hit on many more than you miss? I think so. I think that's very important that you're able to do that. So let's see, obviously, if they can do that. If they're able to keep one or two of those guys I just named, which I'd be shocked by, I that would obviously make the job a lot more attractive. But you need to be portal hunting pretty hard on defense right now, particularly in the front seven. I don't know who else is going to get fired off this staff or reassigned, whatever. But I would expect some more. I don't think you're going to keep the rest of the staff intact, and that goes for football. That also goes for like back office staff. I think you'll probably have some changes there. I'd kind of be surprised if Ray is let go. I know a lot of people ask me that in the Patreon at this point. I don't think he's going to get let go. But 2 months ago, I certainly didn't think Atkins or Fuller were going to get let go after the contracts that they were given, and yet both were. So I guess anything can happen, but I sort of doubt it. Let's see here. Quick updates. I do like FSU's chances with quarterback Carter Smith and Bishop Verot quite a bit. I know I've said on this show many times, and one of the important parts about being honest is that people can pull your receipts when you're wrong on stuff, but they can also pull them when you're like really positive about something, and then you flip your perspective because a player transferred or decided to decommit. So FSU lost Tramel Jones, quarterback, to Florida. I think I was always kind of the lowest on Tramel Jones among all the FSU folks. And the reason was I thought he's a nice player. I don't think he's a guy who's like a program changer necessarily. He's not real big. The arm is good. The release is pretty good. The mobility and athleticism for the size is poor overall. Not like he's not fat or anything like that. I'm just saying that like for his size, he doesn't move very well. And it's not a guy who screams, yeah, you got to break the bank to bring in Tramel Jones. Now, maybe he grows more. Maybe he becomes a lot more athletic. I would be a little bit surprised about that. But it does suck to lose a quarterback that you liked to Florida. It also sucks to lose offensive linemen you like to Florida, obviously. But I don't run FSU's NIL. I couldn't imagine paying a big check for a quarterback who I don't think has amazing upside, personally. Like, to me, you got to manage this like an NFL salary cap structure, which I know every team says they're trying to do. I think some probably do a better job of that than others. If you're able to get Carter Smith, who was committed to Michigan for a long time, for Bishop Verot down there in Fort Myers, I think Tramel is a better player than him right now. I also think Carter has higher upside. This is the difference between player and prospect. I think because the athleticism and the arm strength, Carter Smith probably has higher upside than Tramel Jones. And I need to be thinking of it as like, is this a guy who could actually start for you and play well and like carry you? That's sort of the goal I think you need to have when you bring in high school quarterbacks. And I think you need to bring in one every year, obviously, because they are hard to scout. You could say yes or no, but ultimately it can be pretty tough. I think that's pretty much the most important notes we have going on right now with this program. There's not a ton. We'll see how the Charleston's. I can't believe I'm saying this. We'll see how the Charleston Southern game goes this weekend. I mean, that'll be super exciting to watch, and everybody is excited. But ultimately, like the weather should be awesome. And if you're bringing a kid, that's like a perfect game to bring a young, son or daughter to, which just makes sense. So that's about all I got. I will check with you guys next time. I think FSU will hire pretty good coaches. Doesn't mean they're going to hire absolute rock stars. Again, I think there's concern in the industry that Norvell is maybe a lame duck. But FSU pays top dollar for coordinators. It always has. It did for Jimbo. It did for Willie. Some. And it certainly has for Mike when he's asked for it. So I think they'll continue to pay a high dollar amount. There's a lot of good football coaches out there in the country. And I just want to leave you, like, what happened this year, that it doesn't have to happen next year. Okay. It's kind of a weird confluence of events and things that went wrong. And I don't know that it would actually work out that way if you try next time. So anyway, I will check you guys later. Be well. Go Noles. This has been the Nolecast.